believe we are live. Welcome, everyone. This is the Agile Pulse brought to you by Agile Genesis. And we are having another live session that will be broadcasted via LinkedIn Live as well as YouTube and other social media channels. And of course, making it to our podcast, the Agile Pulse. Today we have with us Marcelo Lopez, our returning champion. Marcelo is a CT, certified Scrum trainer, as well as an RST, a registered Scrum at Scale trainer and Scrum trainer. Marcelo has plenty of experiences that could take up this entire podcast just to do the introduction. So why don't we just get to it? And Marcelo, welcome.
Thank you, Ernesto, for having me on such short notice. I know I kind of thrust today's episode on you earlier this week.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, Marcelo, because you came to me, and of course we collaborate constantly, and we were having a conversation. You said something that struck a chord. You said, there's a lot of misconceptions out there about what Scrum at Scale is or isn't. I think I need a platform to be able to clarify some of those. And I said, well, why don't we just get on a session and clarify for folks? Because I do agree. I think that there's quite a lot that people don't understand about how this framework how it was built, what it is, and what is accomplishing. Now, I do want to put some disclaimers there. I want to be clear on the fact that we're not particularly preaching for any favorable framework. I am certified in SAFe. You, Marcelo, are certified in Kanban, and we use Scrum daily. That includes Scrum at Scale and other aspects of our lives that include many ways in how we can put agility to work. In this case, we're focusing on Scrum at Scale because of some of those misconceptions that we're seeing out there, so that we can be more informative and add value. So tell us a bit about what struck a chord there, Marcelo, and what is Scrum at Scale?
Well, okay, I'll answer the first one. What struck the chord was a conversation that was on LinkedIn, where I could tell there was an opportunity to help clear the air, put a little bit of clarity, really first and foremost, about what Scrum at Scale is about. Okay. And so to answer the second part, I'll just get right to it and say Scrum at Scale is Scrum. Very, very simply put, it's Scrum involving the collaboration, coordination, and cooperation between multiple teams, okay, as well as when an organization wants to apply Scrum at Scale, okay, how the organization itself goes about growing that environment. There's the part of actually doing Scrum at Scale, using Scrum at Scale, and then there's the part of actually fostering and creating the organizational environment. That's stuff people talk about, culture, that allows Scrum at Scale to actually succeed. Okay.
So let's back up a minute on that, because you mentioned Scrum at Scale is Scrum. So why have the two, right? How do they differ? And what is it that we're talking about when we say Scrum? There are many folks on listening now that might be new to Agile. So I don't want to back up all the way to the Big Bang, but just enough to give people some context.
Okay.
The idea that Scrum is a method of implementing agility. What is agility?
Okay.
Agility is a mindset. It's a way of working that allows us to constantly inspect and adapt on the value that we are delivering to customer. Those are quite a lot of keywords and buzzwords there. So I'm going to simplify that, right? It's a way of working when we keep customers at the center of what we're doing, right? There's a lot building to it, but at its simplest, being agile means being customer-centric, delivering product that the customer wants. And we do that in a certain way. In order to be able to implement that, there are different frameworks that allow us to do that. The frameworks are the practical things that we need to do in order to achieve that. And Scrum is a framework that allows us to reach agility, if there's such thing. I believe we are never there because the journey is what makes us agile. But Scrum is a practical framework. That's another way of saying it. It includes things such as the roles, the events, and the material, the artifacts,
Yeah.
to be able to do that. There are other ones that can get you there, or that try to do the same thing, or that do the same thing. Scrum is simply one of those frameworks. It just happens to be the more widely adapted, or the one that has become the most popular, and most organizations use it.
Yeah.
In order to be able to use Scrum in an organization that has more than, let's say, 10 people, well, we need multiple teams. And now that we have multiple teams that need to coordinate with each other, we need an additional way to get those teams to work effectively. And that's when Scrum at Scale comes in. It is the framework that allows multiple teams to successfully work together with Scrum. Sorry, Marcelo, I know that was a little long, but it provides the
No.
basics so that folks can understand what we mean when we say Scrum at Scale now.
It tills the soil, Ernesto. It's perfectly tilling the soil, because it goes along the line of what Scrum is about. Everything that you said, because Scrum is something you use around whatever processes, tools, and practices you actually do today. Okay. And all it's there really is to help you have some radical transparency around is the thing that we're building, the thing we should be building to satisfy the customer, and is the way that we're going about how we're building whatever we're building to satisfy the customer, actually working well. So it's about the what and the how, about the why we're actually here to satisfy the customer. And as you said, yeah, well, if you got more than 10 people, well, let's get one thing straight. Hardly anybody has an organization, unless it's a very nascent startup, that's got that 5 people in a garage band setup. Okay. Very few people or organizations have got that garage band setup anymore. They've got multiple teams, sometimes hundreds of people, at least dozens, if not hundreds of people. And there's got to be some minimal viable bureaucracy, for lack of a better phrase, around that cooperation, collaboration, and coordination. Okay. And that's how Scrum at Scale kind of fits in, because Scrum's that little envelope around the team that lets you do it within that particular team for the things that team wants to deliver for the customer, right? But now when you start adding more and more people, you've got those 3 C's to go along with it. And Scrum at Scale helps you do those 3 things with as minimal viable bureaucracy as you have to have. Okay. And so that was one of the questions that kind of prompted me to reach out to, because one person was like, oh, Scrum at Scale is just a gobsmack of meetings. And I'm like, well, when people need to talk to each other, they're going to have a variety of different things that they're going to want to have to talk to each other out. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a framework around those conversations, or helping manage the chaos of those conversations? Okay. So that they were focused, time boxed, with a goal oriented approach. Well, shoot, those 3 things are Scrum. Okay. And I see a question coming in. Is Scrum at Scale just another safe? And I'll answer it this way. No, it's not, because it's meant to be able to grow organically. In other words, you don't have to start with a pretty picture. Even though Scrum at Scale has some iconography, they give you some examples of how it could or ideally would look like. You can do Scrum at Scale with just 3 teams, just as well you can do it with 24 teams. Okay. And those could all be one product. Okay. And they'd have one backlog. Okay. The differential there is that Scrum says, use your process according to whatever you want. Okay. We're going to put this simple wrapper around it with this minimal viable bureaucracy. Okay. And we're going to let you inspect and adapt to figure out what gets to stay as far as a practice or a process or a tool, and what's got to go. Okay. or if we need to discover some new ways of working to make all this product development stuff actually work. Okay. It's a lot less processing because Scrum itself is less processing, if you will. So that's the reason why it's not just another safe. Okay?
So, Marcelo, you used a very specific term that I recognized, and that is the minimum viable bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm.
That's a Scrum Scale term.
Mm-hmm.
That's how much Scrum Scale was built around this, that it coined that term in the actual teachings that we have, so
Mm-hmm.
that we
Mm-hmm.
know in order to scale successfully, you have to have some structure, some guidance.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you would have chaos.
Right.
And that slight guidance
Mm-hmm.
is what Scrum Scale has been very careful to lay out so that it is the minimum necessary to make that a successful thing without getting in the way of the people.
Right. Right. And so some folks who may have a surface understanding of Scrum itself may interpret that to be that, oh, well, Scrum at scale just adds a whole gobsmack of meetings. Okay. And the fact is, not really. The Scrum at scale really prescribes a slight modification to just 2 events, maybe 3, okay, depending on what you need, but one of them in specific. And that is at a daily basis, because this is Scrum, you want to be able to inspect and adapt on your progress toward any goal that you and your product are trying to reach to. Okay. And so, therefore, on a daily basis, Scrum at Scale says, well, you know what? Your team has a daily Scrum. Well, the conjunction of whatever teams you have involved need to have some sort of an inspect and adapt event. Okay, time boxed as well, okay, to make sure that the communication is flowing in all directions so that this product can steer itself, okay, accordingly. So if something happens over here in that product group, okay, its information can be disseminated across the spectrum of the other teams. And if there's some strategic redirecting that needs to happen, it can be acted on relatively quickly. We don't have to wait for 90 days. We don't have to wait till the end of the sprint. Okay. We can make these pivoting moves, okay, as readily as we absolutely need to because of this modification. It's called the scale daily scrum. Okay. That scales up as you get to more and more teams. Okay. But even those, like I said, they're boxed so that by the time that, let's say, you start at 9 o'clock, you're at 10 o'clock, ideally, you could have had a conversation that involved 25 teams, maybe even more. 25 teams are now realigning towards a product goal that they have in common. Okay. That's not easy to do some other way. Okay. Now, I'm not saying it's not possible organically, but Scrum at Scale gives you that little framework around it to make that possible.
So, to answer that question about Scrum and Scale and Save, I get that question a lot, and their differences. And without getting into the details that are longer than the time we have, I like to say this is just my framing it to put it in perspective. Save feels a lot like it was put together by executives. That's not a bad thing. It's just how it feels. It feels
Mhm.
very corporate. It has layers and different aspects that allow us to find our place if we were in an enterprise, even though we are now practicing Agile as per se. It works in the right organization. I've seen it, I've coached it, I have used it in plenty of times where it's been a successful implementation. At
Mhm.
some point, the organization comes to the question, is this it?
Mhm.
We've improved our productivity. We've gotten some alignment, or we've gotten alignment on the things that we targeted. And we're practicing the SAFe framework. What now? Are we done? how can we improve further? How can we become more agile? So they get more ambitious, as they should, about agility. They want more of that.
Yeah.
Scrum at Scale feels like it was created by people who understood and build Scrum. Well,
Yeah.
why? Because it was created by the co-creator of Scrum, Dr. Jeff Sutherland.
Right. Yeah.
So that allows for the maximum benefit of Scrum to come through in multiple teams while still coordinating.
Hmm.
That is the primary difference. The flexibility of Scrum at Scale simply trumps the flexibility that SAFe offers. But there
Yeah.
is a cultural fit for SAFe, and there is certainly a cultural fit
Right.
for Scrum at Scale. That's how I like to compare the two.
Yeah, yeah, and I also like to look at it this way. Part of the differential is thinking agility is a destination, and I don't mean to get metaphysical here, but versus agility is a journey. Okay, one gives this agility as a destination feel to it. The other is, hey, we all recognize that agility is a journey. Okay, and there's going to be changes along the way, and we need to be able to inspect and adapt and react and respond to those changes when and how they change it. For example, we're on our way to some particular release, a release that we've planned, but something comes along the pike with the customer where they assure us, and obviously they vote with their money, okay, that a different direction is what better suits them. Guess what? An organization can pivot at a more frequent basis because Scrum at Scale is also sprint aligned. We can have these quarterly release cadences for things, but we don't have to just keep to them. Okay. An increment of the product can be released at any given time, including changing direction of what that increment of the product needs to be, because Scrum at Scale is sprint aligned. The cadences are much shorter. Okay. The cadences are much shorter. I think we got some other questions coming in here. So I'll tackle the easy one really quickly. How many product backlogs are there at Scrum at Scale? That's a super simple one. It's like Lord of the Rings. Only one. All teams in a product and Scrum at Scale feed from one backlog. They might be working on different, backlog items, but they're all being withdrawn down from that product backlog. Okay, how people might see them inside of your tooling might make you think that there's different product backlogs, but that's just because that's how they designed Jira. I did make a jab at Jira, but it was an easy target. But I assure you, in Scrum at Scale, it's like Lord of the Rings. There can only be one.
I love that. I'm gonna.
Oh wow, got another question. They're coming in.
Yeah.
They're coming in. Great. What
You want
happens?
to take this one?
Yeah, strategy simple. Product ownership. There is built-in product ownership into Scrum at Scale. Okay. The product cycle, in other words, product ownership, is handled by the executive meta Scrum. That's another one of those adaptations, because now you've got multiple teams that need to have a strategic vision that's cohesive across them. That's the fourth C, cohesive. Okay. And so strategy and prioritization comes through that executive meta Scrum, which, by the way, the product owners don't go away. Okay. They're there. Their conversations are involved. So what product goal ends up getting chosen and decomposed and put into the view of work that each team takes for their sprint backlog, it's handled because there's that product owner cycle, the executive meta Scrum, baked into Scrum at Scale.
So there's a very, very important point, right? Scrum at Scale introduces the minimum amount of roles and events. Here we go again with the minimum viable bureaucracy. And at the center of Scrum at Scale is this executive action team and the executive Meta Scrum meeting, which is really held by the product owners, meaning the product owner team, and a few other executives necessary to align with the strategy. All I've said in that is that there are two particular events that occur. One is a new team, which is the executive action team, and the other one is by another team, which is the product owner team. And between those, you have the right leadership in order to have an effective strategic alignment, as well as the proper execution in order to have the teams be as productive and all of the other good stuff that we get from the engineers if we're dealing with engineers or with software. Very, very small, very minimal.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm gonna maybe trigger you a little bit, Marcelo, and use the term turtle, right? That one of the misconceptions of Scrum Scale is that there are these turtles like structures that seem hierarchical. And well, before I offer my opinion, what are your thoughts on that? Let's clarify that because that's what I
Yeah,
thought was one of the biggest misunderstandings and an
yeah.
opportunity to really create a visual picture of what this is about.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the fact that it looks symmetrical in the representation gives off that gives off that air. The fact is that Scrum at Scale is meant to grow organically. Okay, you don't have to have team of teams or scrum of scrums, okay, that look like the iconography in the hexagon. You could have two over here and four over here, and they're two different product areas, but they're all feeding from the same product backlog, okay, and they don't look like turtles. Okay, so it's an artifact of the iconography, given the fact that if you look at the number of teams that readily coordinate well at an immediate basis with each other, 5, 6, maybe 7 sounds and feels about right before it starts getting a little bit heavy. Okay, but that's an organizational challenge to deal with, which is why we have a different structure for how do we organize and compose the teams around different areas of the product where they can still collaborate, okay, but have certain particular areas that they can focus on to continually deliver value. That's called the executive action team. That team is responsible for creating the environment for agility to flourish using Scrum at Scale. Okay, again, a minimal viable bureaucracy thing. Okay, a lot of people will say to you, but my agile transformation is stuck. Okay, I posit to you that much of the reason why these agile transformations get stuck in the mud, so to speak, I know that's a southern term, get stuck in the mud, is because they're missing this fundamental minimal viable bureaucracy of an executive action team, actual executives who take it as part of their work to say, we want an organization that is resilient, adaptable, flexible, agile. Okay. It doesn't come out of the ether. Some people have to get their hands dirty. That's the executive action team.
And we're in a no nonsense room here. This is not about which framework is better. I myself borrow tools from various frameworks depending on the situation, and it has proven has worked very well for me. In the world of scaling frameworks, we mentioned SAFe, we have Less, we have Nexus, and we have Scrum at Scale. All of these frameworks do this in different ways. I have found that Scrum at Scale simply offers a level of flexibility that allows individuals to start as quick as having two teams working with each other, practicing Scrum at Scale. So the question of when is it the right time for me to scale or for me to use Scrum at Scale if that's what I want to start scaling with. Well, if you have more than one Scrum team, if you just have one Scrum team, not your time yet. Focus on proper Scrum, getting that team to work very, very well. And then that's going to lead to a successful organization
Mhm.
that is going to grow by demand. And that's going to need another team to provide more of that success. At that point, when you have two teams, you are already scaling. So if
Mhm.
you have more than one Scrum team, I have news for you. You're scaling. Your
Mhm.
question is really, how do I scale successfully?
Right.
That's the question. How do
Yep.
I scale where the teams are able to execute and align to our strategy effectively? How do I duplicate what I had with one team with two teams and three teams? And we call that linear scalability. I
Mhm.
should be able to amplify proportionally the same benefits that I had out of one team when I have two teams.
Yep.
If I
Yep.
was getting 100% out of one team, I should be getting 200%. There shouldn't be a degradation
Mhm.
of what I am getting out of those two teams by the fact that I am adding them. And we tend to see that in organizations. So Scrum
Mhm.
Scale is very, very deliberate
Mhm.
about that organic composition that you mentioned, Marcelo, in order to reach the linear scalability because it tries to or it imitates a organic structure. Dr. Jeff Sutherland, the co-creator of Scrum and the creator of Scrum Scale, was really a physics major, and his research took him in radiology to study biological organisms and how they self-organized. And a lot of that we actually see it in Scrum and Scrum Scale, that autonomy, that empowerment that each team has, but
Mhm.
at the same time, they're part of a larger system that doesn't necessarily need all of the bureaucracy, all of that delayed decision making in order to make it work. So reducing that so that we have the maximum benefit out of each team is that linear scalability that Scrum Scale also brings to the picture. Another key
Mhm.
differentiator.
Yeah. It also helps in the sense of that because its design looks like a network, okay, the pathway of communication between different parts of that network, okay, are reduced, okay. You don't have to, you don't, because they're grouped functionally that way, you don't have to go over the river and through the woods, so to speak, okay, to get things across the network, to get people to act upon them. The communication of sense and respond can behave a lot more quickly in this kind of environment. And that's not to say that you couldn't even apply this to an environment that's using safe. The fact is that, and maybe it's just not well enough advertised, is that some organizations who were using safe have actually applied Scrum at Scale around their agile release trains, all of a sudden coming to find out, oh, all this red string that we've been encountering in our PI plannings, maybe we need to do something about this differently. Start actually to chunk down the kinds of dependencies they have. Maybe they don't eliminate them. Maybe some dependencies are good. I'll say that in air quotes, good for an organizational reason, but we reduce the necessary dependency a graph that we have in these PI plannings. A whole lot less red string as a result of applying Scrum at Scale.
Yeah, and the idea, we're almost running out of time here, um, that Scrum at Scale is simple to understand,
Mm-hmm.
but difficult to master should ring very familiar for those of us that are familiar with Scrum.
Mm-hmm.
It really is a simple framework. We don't need to go looking under the hood a lot. It's quite simple. However, it is very difficult to master because of that aspect of having so much flexibility, right? So one of the things that we do in our Scrum Scale classes is we go through multiple team compositions, because you can't just take it off the shelf and say, hey, this is how it looks. We're going to build it so it's symmetrical according to the model. You're going to fit that into your organization needs according to the different Scrum at Scale composition choices that you have. Other frameworks are actually difficult to understand and difficult to master, right? So with Scrum Scale, you get that small, compact approach that you can start to grow with.
Yeah.
So I thought it was important to add that it really is a simple
Mhm.
framework at its core. All of the
Yeah.
things that go behind it are the things that make it difficult to master.
Yeah, and I'll give this as a shout out to other approaches that apply, Scrum, at least Scrum as Scrum is defined, approaches that anything that you are learning within that team of teams, because another scaled event is a retrospective, okay, can be used as learnings for others that you want to now grow elsewhere. Okay. So if you want to leverage what you're learning out of applying Scrum and Scrum at Scale, okay, the mechanisms are there for you to be able to use all that stuff, because working this way, shoot, all these retrospectives, they generate a lot of learnings, or at least they should be, but they should be generating lots of learnings that you can then, if you use that information wisely, a- as a leadership of an organization, say, okay, these are our real lessons learned about once they started applying this. What mistakes do we not make when we start to apply this elsewhere? Okay, because it's part of
When
the
you talk
framework.
about elsewhere, that tickled me. We're almost at wrap up here, but I'll steal a few seconds. Another advantage that I've lived through with Scrum at Scale, it's its ability to implement it in different places in the organization, not just software. That is difficult to do with other frameworks. Say, for example, is very detailed in some of its aspects, and that speaks and walks the language of software development. To try to apply that in other parts of the organization feels a little bit square in a round hole. Whereas Scrum is scaled by the flexibility and by the minimum amount of information that provides, hence the minimal viable bureaucracy, it allows you to be able to put that in a way that feels natural in a sales part of the organization, in the marketing part of the organization. We've done it in quite a few parts of, or even types of companies that never touch a keyboard because their products are completely different. They're non software products. So that's also important. Its flexibility translates into different industries without having to reinvent it. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because just as you can apply Scrum to something outside of software development, okay, Scrum at Scale again could also be applied the same way. Or at least you could start to figure out how you start to adapt your organization's processes, tools, things to take benefit of what Scrum brings to the table.
Marcelo, I think it's time also for a good segue that has a little bit of a commercial aspect to it, but it's very important and valuable for those that are listening and trying to understand how this all works. Agile
Mhm.
Genesis, we offer training, coaching, and actually help you to implement your
Mhm.
transformation. In there, you will find Scrum at Scale classes, such as the Scrum at Scale practitioner class. We actually have one coming up. So if you go to our website, you click on training, you click on class schedule, you will find the registered Scrum at Scale practitioner class, which is a great way to dive deeper into the topics we touched on here to truly understand and equip you with the successful tools to be able to implement this in your organization. It is a 2-day class where it is an interactive. This is an online class where we use tools like Miro and make use of many, many different medias to make sure that we are touching on all of your learning styles as well as delivering material that is specifically fitted for your organization. By hearing your um, good, bad, and ugly, we are able to learn from each other and offer you guidance in going back and implementing this in your organization successfully. So think about registering for one of our Scrum at Scale practitioner classes at Agile Genesis. We also have, of course, Scrum Master classes and product owner classes along with others. We're not just Scrum at Scale, but today I think we did some justice to clearing the air in terms of bringing more understanding uh, about what Scrum at Scale really is and how you might be able to apply that in your organization. Marcelo, I want to thank you for your ever valuable wisdom and for allowing us to come together and deliver this message to the rest of the Agile community.
Yeah, no, it's not wisdom. It's just a whole lot of scars and experience. But I really want to say thank you to you and the Agile Genesis team for indulging me and letting us talk about this for a little while today. Hopefully, folks have come away with a little bit of myth busting and a little bit of curiosity, to find out a little bit more about Scrum and Scrum at Scale itself.
Great. Thank you very much. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great Thursday, everybody.